Well, this is a conversation that's several months in the making, and dozens of people have actually private messaged me about when it's going to finally happen.
Let me guess. When you're gonna go full fash?
That's kind of a, yeah. I mean, it's not quite like that. I mean, I wouldn't describe myself as a fascist, but a lot of other people certainly would. But anyway, I guess I've been trying to figure out the best way to explain it so that people don't think I'm figuratively Mussolini.
I don't know. It's just, look, it's just been really awkward. For the viewers, we've been hanging out a bit before this.
Yeah.
We went for lunch. And this whole time it's been really awkward because it really feels like he's acting like someone who's coming out of the closet. I've known gay people who had a easier time coming out than you did.
Right.
It's really amusing to see.
Okay, so I'll say what I would identify as first.
Okay.
I'm a traditionalist and a formalist.
Traditionalist and a formalist.
Yeah. However, these things, along with fascism, have existed way outside the bounds of the Overton window ever since World War II. And obviously because we lost World War II, we as in the reactionary right. Reactionary is another good word that would describe my views now.
Okay, for me and others who don't exactly know what a reactionary might be defined as academically,
Okay.
you need to explain for everyone.
All right, so here we go. This is the big one, the big explanation. I hope I don't fuck this up.
Yeah. Look, we've had many conversations about his new ideas many times, and he's fucked it up every single time.
And the truth is, I've actually discussed this with other people, and I fucked it up as well. You can actually watch it.
You have a history of failure.
Yeah, you can watch it on Amos's podcast. I actually went on his podcast when I was in Taiwan.
Oh, yeah?
And I fucked it up bad. But
Every time.
Yeah, I've had enough practice now.
Fucking up?
At fucking up to at least fuck it up efficiently.
Okay.
Okay, so here's something that really blew my mind recently. I had been reading Mencius Moldbug.
Yeah, you mentioned that before you left on your Asia trip, like, what was it?
Yeah.
5 months ago?
I gotta mention, actually, that video got taken down by YouTube because of a copyright claim. That's why it's no longer on the YouTube channel, but still on BitChute.
Was it Moldbug? Did Senpai notice that?
It was a WWE copyright claim.
Too bad, like, you know, if we're gonna get copyright claimed, I was hoping it was at least from Mencius Moldbug.
I don't think he would bother. But when I was in Asia, I did some research, some reading, and then one day I typed Mencius into the Google search bar without the Moldbug.
Okay.
And I discovered, actually, where the name...
Who he named himself.
Yeah. And this is when it all really clicked together for me. It's that quite often in kind of the modern era, we look at traditionalism as hocus pocus from the past. It's before men knew any better. You know, that's how they used to do things. They were all superstitious. They believed in gods and the heavens and that kind of thing. It was all hocus pocus. But after discovering who Mencius really was, Mencius was a disciple of Confucius. And the reason why Mencius Moldbug names himself after Mencius is because the ideas that Mencius and Confucius were talking about back then are the same ideas, or it's a similar fundamental framework that Moldbug uses.
Okay.
So one of the key concepts from Confucius, actually, first, is the mandate of heaven. In kind of the modern day interpretation of mandate of heaven, we say, oh, yeah, the ancient Chinese, those silly ancient Chinese, what did they know? They believed that the king was ordained from heaven. But actually, if you take a different interpretation of what they were talking about, they were actually talking about power. They were talking about the mandate of heaven just is. It's not that some god comes down and says, you're the king now. It's that the most the most powerful man in China is the emperor of China. Even if you don't want to call him emperor of China, he's still emperor of China.
No, like, even if you don't want him to call him emperor of China, he'll make you do it.
Yeah, there you go, yeah. So one thing that Mencius Moldbug talks about a lot is sovereignty. And so he doesn't want to use the word king or emperor because those are titles bestowed upon them formally.
Or by themselves.
Yeah, or by themselves. So really, a good description of who is the most powerful man in a specific territory is the sovereign. So Mencius, Confucius, Moldbug, they were all talking about the same thing. And from there, I kind of connected the dots together. It's that traditional thinkers may have used the language of superstition and of gods and of heaven.
Because that was the language of the time. That was the way to express things.
Yeah.
That was their pronouns. Something Z.
All of the Confucius disciples used the suffix Z, right? Yeah. But yeah, it really got me thinking that the ancients knew things that we don't know. that we think we're better than them, but really they thought things differently and they interpreted things differently in a pre-liberal age.
Was it aliens?
Celestial beings.
Aliens.
Another interesting thing about, the more that I looked into this, is that traditions from different parts of the world also all describe similar concepts.
Aliens?
No, not just the aliens. So divine right of kings is exactly the same concept as mandate of heaven, pretty much. And also father as head of the household, hierarchy. So they're describing a lot of the same phenomenon using their own language. It really made sense to me that people of modernity look at things through a liberal lens because of the liberal revolution. But people pre-modernity just looked at things through a different lens. But they weren't stupid. They weren't just superstitious. There's generations of wisdom in there that has been lost because of the liberal revolution.
Funny thing, I was actually talking to my hairstylist about this. For some reason, we were talking about Egypt.
Okay.
I don't know how they built the pyramids, was what he said. I was like, yeah, look, I know, slave labor. Humans can accomplish anything as long as you are willing to throw away enough lives. Mm-hmm. And he's like, no, I mean, aside from that, like, let's forget about the actual manpower involved. It's like, this is thousands of years ago. How the fuck did they figure things so well that it's like basically what GPS could do? You could use a laser to guide it, and they did it almost just as well. Like, how the fuck did they do it?
Yeah.
Do you understand the amount of mathematics involved? I'm like, well, no. And I suspect neither do you, or you wouldn't be cutting my hair.
Hey, in China, he might have been a rocket scientist.
No, he's always been,
Yeah.
But yeah, there's a lot of stuff that the wisdom has just been lost. Like, we don't have it anymore.
Yeah. And one of the reasons why is because in both the French Revolution and World War II, it was liberals versus reactionaries. So they kicked the shit out of the reactionaries, and then they said, fuck you guys don't know shit. All of your theories are bogus. Liberalism is the only thing that can reign supreme now.
Are you saying what I've been thinking all along? That it's the French's fault.
Oh.
The French fucked it up for all of us.
Yeah. The liberal revolution was a mistake, and it's the French's fault. So reason number one why I call myself a traditionalist neo-reactionary is because I think that the reactionary description of power and hierarchy makes a whole lot more sense than the liberal description of power and hierarchy.
Well, I would even agree with that.
Yeah.
It's very realistic. It's not based on ideals.
Yes.
It's not based on what should be, but
What
it is.
Yes.
Yeah. I think that's way more important than what should be.
A lot of reactionaries like to use the phrase that our philosophy is descriptive before being prescriptive, meaning what's most important is that we accurately describe things as they is and allow the truth, as they are.
You spent too much time in Asia, so I of all people have to correct his grammar now.
So yeah, describe things as they are, allow the truth to reveal itself, and then go from there. Whereas liberalism was built on idealism. It was built on the egalitarian ideal, and we can finally rid the world of evil kings and tyrants and all live as equals with democracy to rule the day. And that might have worked in the initial founding of America, but it didn't last very long.
Well, like I said, all the time, nothing ever lasts.
Yeah. But here's something interesting too. Let's quickly jump over to Hindu mythology for a sidetrack, which is that the Hindus also described four civilizational ages, the four yugas.
Look, we're in the Kali Yuga.
Yes, we are in Kali Yuga.
How long is it going to be? Like 10,000 years of this?
Yeah, I mean, I think their time scales are off, but at the same time, one thing that's interesting about the four yugas is that each yuga is shorter than the previous. So the longest yuga is actually the first yuga, the age of priestly and saintly men. And then the last age, the age of degenerates, is actually 4 times shorter than the first age. So
I don't know, it really feels like the other way around though. Like when you're living in it, it really feels like the Kali Yuga is 4 times longer than everything else.
Right.
It really depends on when you're living. The people who wrote this, they probably lived in the age of the snakes.
Yeah, sure,
it just felt longer.
Yeah. So reason number 2 why I'm a traditionalist is because I believe that traditional orders last longer than the orders of modernity. But let's also talk about the 4 cycles. So recently I watched this video about Evola and I become engrossed by all of Evola's thinking.
Braun?
Julius Evola.
Oh.
Yeah.
I was thinking you were talking about D&D for a second.
Oh, yeah. Julius Evola, he described himself as a super fascist. That's what he said when he was on trial for war crimes.
Did he gel his hair? he like dyed blonde?
I think he had dark hair, actually.
I know, but if you're gonna call yourself super anything,
Oh, yeah.
like,
He's gotta go blue hair.
yeah, it's like that's his final form. That's not even his
He's a
final.
god fascist. Super fascist god. But he was a super fascist. No. But one thing that Evola was very fascinated about was also the 4 ages. We're all very familiar with the meme, strong men create good times create weak men, etc. But one thing that's actually often overlooked in the 4 cycles, there's a couple of things actually.
See, I think it's actually real times creates real niggas. Real niggas be straight chillin'.
Yeah.
Straight chilling creates weak niggas. Weak niggas lead to real times.
So some key information is actually missing from the 4 cycles. One of them is actually the way that technology influences the 4 cycles. So you have hunter-gatherers, then you have warriors, then you have merchants, and then you have slaves. Yeah, he's rubbing his hands together. So I guess this is the point where you might never hear from us again unless you watch us on BitChute from now on. But this is something that's been described not only by Evola, but by so many thinkers and writers that I've come across lately. And not all of them are fascist, by the way. There's actually a book by an author named Yuri Sleskin, who is a Russian Jew. His book is called The Jewish Century, actually. And even he talked about kind of the developmental cycle of civilizations and how that affects who rules the ruling caste of that time. So,
Well, it's probably not the slaves.
well, in Kali Yuga, it does become the slaves, but we'll get to that.
Well, rules.
Yeah.
Look, you can't be the ruler of nothing.
Yeah.
When there's nothing left, you don't really rule anything.
Yeah. So in the first age, it's often characterized by, there's nothing, it's bad times, and building from the ashes. So in the first age, whoever has those ideas that unite people and bring together people into a new formed society, that's the ruling caste. And that is called the Age of Priests. Because in antiquity, quite often it was a religious ruling caste. They described God and the grand order of things, and people believed them, flocked to them, and then they formed a social order. So this is the first age in the Yuga cycles, the first age in civilizational cycles, and so on.
Well, if you want to just be more analytical about things, it's an age where people who inspire others rule.
Yes, yeah.
It's not about the wealth because there's nothing left.
Yeah.
It's not about power because there's nothing to fight over.
Mm-hmm.
It's about people who can inspire others to join hands.
Yeah. And ideas are that currency to build a civilization. So in the second age, after that, we have the Age of Warriors. And that's when it's time to fight the neighboring tribes. That's when you need the army. That's when you need the swords and shields and the men. You need the men. This is actually a key thing that I want to talk about.
Punching is the greatest martial art ever.
This is also tends to be a more agrarian age too, where, you're settled. You have your civilization now. You have your farms on the outskirts of the city. You have your walled city.
Ideology takes a back seat mostly because sometimes morals get in the way of war.
True, yeah. And this is the time when men are the most valuable in society. You need the men to fight. You need the men to make stuff. You need the men to work the farms.
You need the men to essentially throw into the meat grinder.
Yeah.
They're not valuable because they have inherent value, but they're valuable because we need more of them to die.
Yeah. There's also an honor culture that forms around this because you have to venerate the people who keep your civilization alive.
I also feel like the concept of honor, men tend to have a more idealized view of honor rather than women.
Yeah. I was talking with another friend about this recently where I describe left versus right as matriarchy versus patriarchy, but he also describes it as schizophrenia versus autism. Because autism tends to be a more male thing, and schizophrenia more female.
I actually say there's evidence of this mostly because of the media men consumes versus the media women consumes. I don't think it's an error to assume, for example, mafia or gangster media or yakuza media, like all of which, yes, crime families, but they're very fixated on the concept of a code of honor. It's not the law, but they have an honor system.
Yeah.
And the people who eat this type of fiction up are the men.
Mm-hmm.
Or, look, as a woman, is it cool that if you commit dishonor, you're gonna, cut your guts open and it's gonna... and if you scream, you got a guy there to cut your head off before you disgrace yourself.
Yeah.
Ask any woman you meet on the streets if this is cool, and I'm willing to bet that most of them would say, no, that's stupid.
It's toxic masculinity. So I think a lot of right-wingers actually look at this kind of warrior honor culture with a bit of admiration, and nostalgia.
A lot of us look at it as a birthright we never managed to inherit.
Yeah. So this is another reason why I describe myself as a traditionalist, because we're no longer in the age of warriors anymore. We are now actually...
Well, you skipped an age.
Did I? No.
Yeah, you did. There's 4 ages.
I know. We're in the age of merchants right now.
Okay. We're not even into Kali Yugas.
Yeah. Well, no, actually, no. We're
leaving.
We're pretty much leaving the
age of merchants.
Yeah. Hand rubbing intensifies. This was something that was described by a lot of people, but I'll talk about Yuri Sletskin's description, because Yuri Sletskin is the Jew who wrote about it, so I don't get in as much trouble.
Yeah, like, what do people even say when it's their own people talking about this?
Race traitor, secret fascist, I don't know. But he's actually a very highly acclaimed university professor at UCLA, I think. History professor.
Oh, right?
Yeah.
How has Antifa not gotten to him yet?
I have no idea how this guy is still alive.
He's got his merchant connections.
Yeah. So one thing that Yuri Sletskin talks about in his book, The Jewish Century, is that quite often there's the same phenomenon that happens, where a diaspora,
I have no idea what that was.
an immigrant group of people, a large immigration goes into a country, and they do all the merchant jobs. They do banking, they become entrepreneurial, they do a lot of money handling.
They open laundry shops. Totally not to laundry money, but to launder stuff.
Yeah. Whereas the native population that's been there for generations, they tend to do more of the blue collar stuff. Their family has been on this farm for X generations. My dad has been working in this factory for 3 generations. They're more salt of the earth. So this is not something that's only characteristic of Jewish diaspora. Although the Jews, by most standards, are the most successful people to do this across Europe and across the world.
You see now, the Asians are late to the game, but they're doing quite well as well.
Southeast Asia, you go to Malaysia especially, who is the merchant diaspora of Malaysia and Thailand, etc., etc. It's the Chinese. Yeah. And actually, if you go to East Africa, it's the Indians.
I thought China is pushing in there.
Oh, they are now, yeah. But historically, it's been the Indians. So Yuri Sletskin describes these people as Mercurians, after the Greek god Mercury, god of commerce.
Isn't that the Roman version? Okay, that's if you want to do the Greek version, it's Hermes.
Oh, okay.
Thank you, Fate Stay Night.
So he describes the Mercurians as quite often exhibiting the same behaviors. So not only are they money handlers, but they're also very in-group. They have a very strong in-group preference. They don't consider themselves integrated into the native population. Quite often they're a little bit stuck up about their status in society. I don't know. I think people get it, right? Can move on. I can move on to the other side. Let's just talk about the other side first.
So we're going to try to do this efficiently.
Okay.
I don't know how much claim you have left to that, but let's just try.
The other side of the coin is the Apollonians, after the Roman god Apollo. A good example of Apollonians is the heartland of America. It's the red states. And the blue states is a very good description of Mercurians. So it's these people who, they can't learn to code. They don't want to.
They don't want to. That's how they're living right now. They like how they're living right now. Yeah. They don't see any reason to change. Don't fucking tell them to change.
Yeah.
They're happy now.
Yeah. Whereas the Mercurians will say, oh, look at these backwater hicks, boorish people. They don't understand cosmopolitan culture.
I don't even know why people find cosmopolitan culture so great anyways. But, that's not really the topic today.
Yeah. So anyway, for a long time, we've been living in the age of merchants.
And it's good being in the age of merchants. Less wars, less people die. Everyone gets a bit richer, at least in the beginning.
At least in the beginning. And that is the key here. Because we're now in late Mercurian or late merchant age. And we've seen the downside now. We've seen that people have lost all sense of tradition. We've seen that society is in decay. People are extremely nihilistic, materialistic, and there's also this huge divide between people who live in the big cities who have adopted cosmopolitan Mercurianism versus people who live in the heartlands who have stuck to the Apollonianism. This is the conflict of our time, and it's playing out in every election across the world.
Even here recently in Canada, if you look at the voting pattern, it's exactly this.
Yeah.
So, this very much is the fact. It isn't left versus right. It just manifests as left versus right. Yes. But this is the same thing that's happened in every cycle. Mm-hmm. This is about the Apollonians versus... That's just the conflict of the age.
Yeah. So I think this is something that's been missing a lot from right-wing discussion because we've been so focused on socialism versus capitalism. But, if you really took a bird's eye view of all the countries across the world, all of them are a mix of socialism and capitalism. So what are we really fighting over? And what is this kind of new wave of electoral politics that's coming to the fore? It's actually Mercurians versus Apollonians, rather than, oh, do we want more social programs or less social programs?
So are you a Mercurian or Apollonian?
Well, this is what separates the traditionalist from the populist of modern day, and from Mussolini and Hitler. It's that traditionalists harken back to the age of warriors and priests. We think that in tradition is where we'll find the optimal society, not in the age of merchants. There's too much wisdom that's been lost from the age of tradition, especially when it comes to giving people meaning and describing transcendental values. And because the liberals decided to reject everything traditional, they've opened the door for whatever is coming right now. And what's coming next is way worse than the age of merchants. And we're already seeing it. It's the age of slaves. It's the age of slave morality. It's where, instead of money being the most important commodity, victimhood suddenly becomes the commodity of the day. It's a veneration of the downtrodden and the poor and the huddled masses. And I guess this has happened in the past before, but what's happened this time is that we transitioned from Christian ethics to secular Christian ethics. Christianity always had this idea about all men created equal, we must venerate the poor, the meek shall inherit the earth. But because of the slow transition from Christianity to secularism, some of the values were gone, the God stuff kicked that out the window, but the venerating the poor stuff stuck around.
Well, I don't think this is the difference. The difference was last time Kali Yuga came around, there was actually people who are weak and downtrodden. Mm-hmm. There were people who are legitimately suffering in the same society that is transitioning from age of merchants to the age of slaves. Yeah. Whereas, look, by all means, even our slaves live really well.
Well, there's one thing about material standard of living, which I agree. But at the same time, there's also another factor, which is distance to power, which is that even though they're living great, the downtrodden and the garbage humans of our modern day era, they feel completely powerless. So that's why they feel like they're victimized.
Oh, that's not what I'm talking about. Yeah. I'm talking about the major difference is, look, yeah, like you're at the bottom strata of society, you're barely making ends meet, but you're not actually starving.
Yeah, that's true.
You're not actually out on the streets, you're not actually exposed to elements. In most countries in Europe or Canada, if you're terminally ill, someone will at least look at you.
Yeah.
So these things were not the things that were happening in the last cycle. Last cycle, it was like, you're just gonna die. Yeah. But in this cycle, comparatively, there's a lack of actual suffering. People must invent suffering.
Well, I guess you could say the thing is that humans are social animals. So we're evolved to sense where we are in terms of hierarchy. And so, yeah, it's not like you're gonna die on the streets, but at the same time, you are the bottom rung of societies. And that's still an existential crisis to some degree.
No, I'm not disagreeing with you, but okay, let's put it this way. If you're gonna tell people, okay, why are you suffering? Well, because I'm not getting all the shit that the rich and powerful are getting. Because I'm not as privileged as...
Because I'm the bottom caste of society. Yeah. I feel like I have no power in society.
Yeah, but while that may make some people sympathetic, it's not going to make people as sympathetic as, no, I literally starve on the streets. Mm-hmm. These people require sympathy. They crave it.
Well, the sympathy does ultimately come from the cathedral. So the cathedral right now, the mainstream media, academia, the leftists, the progressives, they push this narrative. You know, trans women, they can't ride the bus. They can't use the same bathrooms or something, right? And it does.
I'll let you know what they can do is beat women in world championship bike races. Yeah. So at least you have that. We men, we're not allowed to do that. You have that over us.
Actually, let's talk about the sympathy too. There's another interesting thing that I came across recently. The sympathy factor. Where does the sympathy come from? This is actually from Edward Dutton.
Well, I can't tell you because I have no sympathy.
Right. But Edward Dutton, who studied psychology, he talks about the psychology of the middle class. And so in a merchant society, the middle class is the biggest class. In previous ages, it might have been more balanced. But, you know, as we become more well-off, more materially wealthy, the middle class becomes the dominant class. And so the middle class has always had this kind of inferior little brother complex compared to the elites. Because they know the Joneses are always going to drive nicer cars and have bigger houses than us.
I actually think it's they understand no matter how good they do, there's an insurmountable gap.
Yeah. However, how the middle class is always compensated for this
is to shit on the lower class. I love that.
Yeah, that's part of it. But also to claim moral high ground.
Oh, well. No, I don't love that.
So they've always had this thing where we're morally better people than the other classes. So the rich, though, they've lost their way. The poor, they're too boorish. Us middle class, this is where it's at. This is where the absolute moral high ground is at. So that's why this sympathy stuff, this slave morality, works so effectively on the ever-growing middle class. It's because you want the moral high ground? Okay, this is what it means to be moral. You have to be...
But it comes at a cost. And I'm rubbing my hands.
Yeah. But it's you have to support LGBT. You have to be Green New Deal. Everything progressive is basically the moral high ground, now that Christianity is out of the way. So that's how slave morality gets ushered in. It's playing on the sympathies and the moral fagging of the middle class.
All right. That seems, well, it is legit. It doesn't just sound legit. It is, we live it.
So that's Kali Yuga. That's the final age. And then from the ashes will rise a new priest class.
Does he mention how Kali Yuga usually ends up blowing over?
There's a couple things.
Because I think that's what everyone wants to know here.
Yeah. Okay, so here's where it gets pretty interesting too. It's that during times of stress, religiosity goes up. Human beings are just hardwired that way.
So you're telling me that I need to create a religion?
That's actually kind of the key point that I want to stick into today's video.
Is that we need to create our own religion?
Is that the next ruling caste is the caste of priests. So we've been doing this whole time trying to convince the middle class, no, the right wing, we're the good guys. Well, fuck that. It's all about who's going to be the next priest caste. But I got ahead of myself there. Okay.
Yes, we did. We shouldn't have told people this. Like, look, I want to be the first pope.
Well, good. So during times of stress, religiosity goes up, and that's why it gives way to a priest caste. But the ages are not really the ages kind of blend with one another. So there is a time when it's kind of a balance between warrior and merchant. There's a time when it's right now.
Transitional.
Yeah, transitional periods. Sometimes a transitional period encompasses 3 quadrants even. Because we're already kind of seeing hints of what is potentially the next priest caste.
And is it bad news?
It's bad news. It's terrible news, actually. But it's only potentially. I mean, there's so much potential for that to change. But right now, it's bad news.
We can still fight.
So first, I just want to draw the axes clearly, okay? So there's left versus right. There's patriarchal autism versus matriarchal schizophrenia. Ethics of care versus ethics of systems. And then on this axis, on this horizontal axis...
He's drawing lines in the air.
There's traditionalism and there's modernity. Religion versus materialism. And I don't mean religion as necessarily God.
He's now waving his own.
Yeah. It's more religion as in you believe that there is this universal order that is cosmic and undeniable. And you want to look at everything through that kind of holism, through the grand order.
Look, you just call it aesthetics.
Yeah, there's an aesthetic component to it.
You went through 3 months where all you can say is aesthetics. You might as well just use the word now.
Yeah. Whereas materialism is very much anesthetic. It's very much about atoms colliding, particle physics, and everything atomized. So the economy is the economy. Politics is politics. Society is society. It doesn't look at everything through one grand order. It's looking at everything through a microscope.
Okay.
So I've already described what is traditional right, the age of warriors. I've described what is material right, which is the age of merchants. I've described what is material left, the age of slaves. Traditional leftism is kind of a bit of a mystery to most people. When I tell them traditional leftism, they, what? But traditional leftism, it's a matriarchal tradition. It's matriarchal religion. And I think it's best characterized by pagans. Pagans who would worship the goddess of the harvest, the goddess of the sun. We must live in unity with nature. We can only live until 72 and then we have to kill ourselves.
Oh no. I'm just seeing it right now. This is terrible. Like
it's New Age.
This all ties into that environmental bullshit where that we're seeing a surge of right now. We have to fight it.
And, unfortunately, according to the Yuga cycle, the Age of Priests is the one that lasts the longest, and it's being pushed right now very hard by the elites.
Do you think they know? Do you think they do this knowingly?
So the more conspiratorial of us would say, absolutely, this has been the plan all along, because the Freemasons and those, what do they do in the Bohemian Grove and all the spirit cooking stuff? That's all related to.
Some people just like eating semen, okay?
Although I've heard that breast milk. No, I shouldn't. That's disgusting. But yeah, I mean, there are some theories to suggest that this has been the plan all along, that they knew next comes the Age of Priests, and this is all part of the plan.
I don't know. I still have this feeling that what if the rich and the elites are just as stupid as the rest of us, and this just happened to coincide?
A lot of them could be getting strung along, but, something is up, right?
I think it's best to look at it from the point of view that this could be the worst case scenario, because it's better to be prepared rather than not.
I watched this movie called Midsummer. Midsummer paints the perfect picture of what that New Age paganism looks like.
Something tells me that movie, I won't like that movie.
Oof. It's actually, it's a very creepy, very eerie movie. You won't like it, but it...
Well, I like creepy stuff, mostly because I'm tone deaf, but...
But it certainly does paint a very vivid picture. The rituals that they go through. They consider a human life having 4 cycles: spring, summer, autumn, winter. And then when a person reaches age 72, they have to jump off a cliff in this ritual.
What if they die before 72?
They probably eat them or something. Well, they probably bury them with the crops or something. The circle of life type of stuff. And then they have mating rituals. Everything is approved by the matriarch. They have this, those people who tell the future, the prophesizers, the oracle. Yeah. So they have this autistic oracle, severely autistic. So she just smears brown paint on the piece of paper.
Sure it's not shit?
And then the elders interpret what that means. They say, oh, it's going to be a bountiful harvest this year.
No, that's just feces, sir.
So, by a lot of our standards, it's a pretty fucked up society. But if you look at it from their perspective, they're in tune with nature, one with the cosmos.
No, that's
totally.
I do not want to live like that.
Yeah. So my suggestion for the right wing is first, take in the information that the priest caste is the way out of the age of the slaves.
What do we do? What do we do? I mean, I could start a religion. Could probably do that.
Yeah.
But alternatively, I feel like maybe the right could see if they could somehow, after they kick Francis out, strengthen the church.
Yeah, I mean that's one way to do it, certainly. And there is a resurgence in Christianity as of late too. So, there's potential for a new golden age of Christianity.
Well, I'm just saying Christianity because it's the closest thing at hand.
Yeah.
I'll take anything over that hippie shit.
There's a very clear distinction, matriarchal, patriarchal there.
Okay, here's a question. Here's a point of discussion. Those Bohemian Grove guys, the elites, the Illuminati, they're mostly men. Like, why are they pushing this matriarchy?
Yeah, it's interesting.
That confuses me.
Well, one way to look at it is that the traditional left takes the view that civilization is a social construct. So they're very much about what is purely natural to human beings. So hedonism, they think, is the purely natural state. Live like the animals, free and in tune with nature. Whereas right-wing traditionalism takes the view that civilization is divine. It's from the cosmos. It's from God. So we're all about how do we elevate ourselves, transcend nature, to elevate ourselves to be above the animals.
Be as gods.
Yeah, be as gods.
Yeah. Shall be as gods.
Yeah. Whereas the traditional left is be as nature.
Well, basically, we have to win this because if we don't, this is essentially the conflict of two survival strategies. As much as we hate it, we are related to those assholes. And against beings that are fundamentally the same, with a divergence in survival strategy, losing means extinction.
Evola, actually, though, thinks of the ideal ruling caste as warrior priest. He thinks that there's a sweet spot right in between.
See, you ever notice that if you add the word warrior to anything, it sounds cool?
It does, yeah.
It's like warrior poet, warrior priest, warrior scholar. You can stick any of those other things together without the warrior, and they won't sound nearly as cool. But if you say warrior something, it automatically just gets an upgrade.
Yeah. So Evel's ideal ruler is a man who's both in tune with civilization and transcendence, godliness, but also in tune with nature. And, I guess everybody will vary on that.
Wait.
Yeah.
You're basically saying this man he's everything but a slave and merchant.
Yes.
This ideal ruler he prescribes is someone who is neither average nor bad. He is a man who stands at the top.
Right. A true king.
Yeah.
And that's very much in line with reactionary thought.
Because, merchants are the middle class.
Yeah.
Slaves, they're slaves.
Yeah.
How often does a man like that come along?
Yeah, that's...
But to round out my theory about why it's a matriarchy, they're pushing for a matriarchy, this actually came from a light novel I've been reading called Otome Games Are Difficult for Mobs. So if you don't want any spoilers, skip the next little bit. There's actually a very interesting similar situation in the novel where societal power has been inversed, even though the men are the ones who fight and die and protect the country. Mm-hmm. It's a feudal system. But the women have all the power. And later on, it's in volume 3, you find out that it was actually engineered like that. The royal family actually pushed this culture to weaken the nobles so they could eventually form a centralized power government. So this might be it. As you know, the elites don't live by our rules.
Yeah.
Even if they create a matriarchy, they will not live in a matriarchy.
Yeah.
They've created a matriarchy to weaken the middle class and the slave class.
High-low versus the middle.
So there you go. Thank you, light novel.
I mean, I know usually we're supposed to give solutions, but
I'm going to give a solution and you give a solution.
Okay.
I can start.
Sure.
Start a religion.
Yeah.
Or join mine.
Yeah. I would encourage people to start reading up more on traditional philosophy. And that's the beginning of it. And Moldbug actually said one thing. If you want to go first?
It's actually in response to what you just said. It's very important to read up on philosophy because of the fact that, look, this traditionalism stuff, this is something completely alien to a lot of people. We've only been taught left and right. Capitalism, socialism, matriarchy, patriarchy. That's all we've been taught. There's all these other philosophies out there that we are, I wouldn't say not allowed, but we were never given the resources to explore. So it's important to actually know who you are first. And then from there, only can you proceed.
Yeah.
First, look outside of the world that we are made to see by the system.
Yeah. And we've been stuck in this Overton window for so long, and it's so restrictive.
And it's only getting worse.
Yeah.
Thanks, YouTube.
So one thing that Moldbug said recently was that he was talking about successful revolts. He says that throughout history, most successful revolts have been elite versus elite, not so much commoner versus elite. Oftentimes, the elites will recruit commoners to do the fighting, but more often than not, the initial idea and all of the funding comes from a group of rogue elites. So that is ultimately, if we're going to try to overthrow the elites of modern times, that's ultimately one of the most tried and true strategies.
So will he become Mencius Moldbug?
It's clever, actually. Well, we are starting to see signs of rogue elites. Donald Trump is a sign. Donald Trump might not be the rogue elite that we wanted, that we needed, but he was the one that we got.
Are you saying he's not the one we need, but he's the one we deserved?
Yeah. But it is an important moment, actually, to see someone like Trump, who was an elite, go rogue and piss off all the other elites. And it could only lead, it could potentially lead to the true rogue elite who will overthrow the elites.
Is he the rogue elite to end all rogue elites?
Well, he's the one to begin all the rogue elites.
He's the one true rogue elite?
But again, a lot of people think he didn't go rogue enough. I agree, actually.
You can never go rogue enough.
Zuckerberg is kind of going a little bit roguish lately.
Why do you think so?
Well, one thing about Zuckerberg is that at the very least, he's intellectually curious. He's not someone who just stays in an echo chamber. And the echo chamber that he's in probably pissed him off too.
He crawled up his ass so far that even he said, fuck it. I think what caused this situation to get worse and worse is the fact that somehow, somewhere along the way, someone put the idea into the liberals' heads that they can't be friends with conservatives. Like, you can't even talk. If they don't vote Hillary, if they're not a hill dog, you can't even talk to them.
Yeah.
Like, what's up with that?
Well, that's the moralizing. That's like, you can't talk to conservatives? Well, I can't even be family members with conservatives. The next person, well, I have to punch a fascist every time I see one on the street. Well, I have to pour concrete on him. And it just one-upmanship to prove that they're the more virtuous middle classer.
Do you think this just happened on its own? Was this a calculated move? I think it's a calculated move.
I think it's somewhat calculated, but a lot of this is also the natural result of a civilization going through the motions, going from agrarian society where men are high value to this age of abundance and decadence.
Well, this is the worst case scenario we just talked about, so be aware of that. Everyone should decide, well, first with ourselves what we're going to do, and then we could form groups.
And naturally, actually, a lot of this stuff will mesh together. It's going to all jumble up. People are going to talk on the internet, on the streets, and it's going to bubble up to people like Zuckerberg, and then they're going to push it. So it's going to be this whole process of things bubbling up.
Go rogue.
Yeah. So
go rogue.
Okay. So did I fuck it up?
Well, you did a lot better than I expected. I thought this was going to be like our last 8 videos. You tried to do something like this where we just go in circles and like you clearly have a point, but you're not making it. Like that's what I expected. You're in no way efficient, but you got the job done at the very least this time.
It is quite difficult to
come out of the closet
and to talk about a lot of these things. I mean, 4 months ago, I wasn't in any of this, right? So it's all fairly new to me, and I'm trying to get the hang of how to describe these concepts.
He has these feelings about people that he never had before, so it's very confusing time for him.
Yeah. And there was this whole spiel about China that I wanted to throw in, but forget it.
China gets its own video.
But yeah, it's because Xi Jinping talks about Confucianism, but I bet you he doesn't know shit about Confucius, because the society that he's building
is definitely not Confucius.
It's way far from Confucianism. It's pure materialist, mercantile, and has no sense of tradition whatsoever.
Hey, he knows how to do PR, like, because the Chinese love the word Confucius.
Yeah. Most Chinese probably don't even know what Confucius was about.
Kind of like a few years ago. Around here, the good PR word was sustainable. Yeah. I had this theory that at one point, all we're going to be saying is sustainable. In the more recent few years, it's progressive.
Yeah.
Progressive. And over in China, at least things don't change as fast over there. It's all about Confucius. So, it's just PR. He doesn't care about Confucius.
Yeah. And he's wrong on Confucian theory too. But that's... Okay, let's end here. Well, since I talked about my new views, most capitalists would say that I'm not a real capitalist.
Well, I'm still most definitely a capitalist.
Yeah.
This pursuit right now, I believe it goes beyond capitalism.
Yeah.
They're trying to build a world where you can't decide what you want. This is bad for everybody. This is not just bad for the capitalists. Maybe it'd be especially bad for the capitalists, but this is bad for, well, the socialists, really, even, because they will only push socialism when it's ideal to them.
So my question is, I know you don't like change, but is there a potential name change that we could come to for this channel?
What, just the Asians? I don't know if I can call myself a traditionalist.
That's true, yeah. Someone suggested a really funny one.
What?
The people date of heaven. Mandate, but then we don't say man around here.
No.
No.